Imagine this. Safe drinking water. It's declared a fundamental human right by the UN, right?
Absolutely.
Yet somehow, a staggering 1 billion people, mostly in urban slums worldwide, they struggle every single day just to get access to it.
It's a huge number, almost hard to comprehend.
It really is. And what often gets missed, I think, is the full picture. It's not just if water is available, it's also when, how consistently, and crucially, the quality. And these things, they aren't just changing year to year or season to season. We're talking fluctuations day to day, maybe even hour to hour.
Exactly, which is why today we're doing this deep dive, really getting into the temporal dynamics of drinking water access and quality in urban slums. It's a review from Science of the Total Environment.
And it's fascinating stuff because it really challenges how we usually think about and measure water access globally.
It does, and that's really our mission for you today. We want to explain why the standard ways of monitoring the global programs, they largely miss these critical, fluctuating daily realities. We'll unpack why these time dynamics are so incredibly important, what it all means for health, and how it should shape future solutions.
And you'll hear why an improved water source, that term we hear a lot, isn't always a safe one.
Precisely. And how the daily, sometimes really impossible decisions people have to make affect whether they get clean water or not.
So let's start with that stark reality you mentioned.
Yeah.
An estimated 1 billion people living in urban slums globally. And their access to clean drinking water is, well, woefully inadequate, is putting it mildly.
It's disastrous, really. And remember that UN declaration in 2010, safe water as a basic human right, it's still completely out of reach for so many.
And the health impacts are just huge.
They are devastating. The Global Burden of Disease Study, which is this massive international effort tracking health, linked 1.8 million deaths globally just in 2015 directly to water pollution.
Wow, 1.8 million.
Yeah. And what's really striking when you look closer is that households in slums, they often have to rely on multiple different water sources, not just one.
Just to get enough for basic needs.
Exactly. And their choice of which source to use on any given day, it's influenced by this constantly shifting mix of things. Quality, obviously, but also availability, how reliable it is, and how much it costs.
Which brings us right back to that core question we want to tackle. What if these factors aren't static? What if they're constantly changing?
Precisely. And for a long time, global efforts sort of assumed they were static.
Like the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. I remember those targets for water access.
Exactly. And that's where the problem sort of began. It was a classic case of measuring what seemed easy to measure, not necessarily what mattered most on the ground.
So what did they focus on then?
The MDGs mainly looked at physical access to what they called an improved water source, things like, piped water into the dwelling or a protected well.
Okay.
But they largely ignored whether that water was actually safe to drink, whether it was truly affordable for the poorest, or even if it was reliably there when people needed it.
That created a massive blind spot, didn't it?
A critical one. Because an improved source doesn't automatically mean safe water. So we were, in a way, celebrating progress on paper that didn't reflect the daily reality for millions.
That's a really important distinction. So when the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, came along in 2015, did they fix this? What about SDG 6.1?
Well, they certainly aim to. SDG 6.1 specifically calls for universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all by 2030, a much higher bar.
Okay, so how did they measure that?
To try and address the old shortcomings, the Joint Monitoring Program, or JMP, that's the UNICEF body that tracks this, introduced an updated water ladder in 2017.
A ladder.
Yeah, kind of levels of service. And the top rung, safely managed water, is defined as drinking water from an improved source that's located right there on the premises, available when needed, and free from fecal and priority chemical contamination.
That sounds much better. On premises, available when needed, and free from contamination.
It was a big step forward, definitely. But, and here's the crucial point from the paper, even with these advances, these vital temporal dynamics, the changes happening hour to hour, day to day, season to season are still largely overlooked in the big picture monitoring.
How so?
Well, the JMP, for example, typically asks households about their main source of water. It sort of assumes it's a fixed thing.
But we just said people often use multiple sources.
Exactly. It ignores that complex, constantly shifting reality in slums, where families might use a tap in the morning, a vendor in the afternoon, maybe rainwater if it rained. It changes.
So the core idea of this research we're diving into is that water access and quality, they aren't just a snapshot. They vary significantly over different timescales. It's a moving picture.
That's the perfect way to put it, a moving picture. And to really understand that picture, the paper breaks it down into three key interlinked timescales.
Okay, let's unpack those.
Right. So first, there's the short term. This covers everything from sub-daily changes, like literally hourly fluctuations, up to week variations.
Hour to hour.
Yeah. Then you've got the medium term. Think month-to-month changes or season-to-season shifts, like rainy season versus dry season.
Makes sense.
And finally, there's the long-term scale. That's looking at year-to-year changes, maybe due to infrastructure improvements or degradation or climate patterns over time.
And crucially, these aren't just, interesting academic points. These shifts over these different times directly impact health risks for people daily.
Absolutely. They shape exposure to contaminants and pathogens constantly.
Okay, so let's dig into the specific factors that are changing. You mentioned availability, reliability, affordability, quality. Let's start with availability.
Right. So even if there are multiple water sources nearby in a slum, the distance really matters. It hugely impacts the quantity of water people can actually collect.
Because of the effort, right, carrying heavy cans, waiting in line.
Exactly. The physical effort, the time spent queuing, the travel time. It all adds up. But here's where it gets really interesting, connecting back to time. Those other demands on people's time, things like needing to go to paid work, childcare, cooking, cleaning, those demands also fluctuate day to day, season to season.
Ah, I see where you're going. So if you suddenly have less time on a particular day,
You might be forced to choose a water source that's quicker to get to or has shorter queues, even if you suspect the quality isn't as good, just to save time.
wow, that's a tough choice. Which leads us, I guess, to reliability.
Definitely. And a huge issue here is what's called intermittent supply, basically water not being available 24/7.
Which is pretty common in many cities, right? Not just slums.
Very common, often due to aging infrastructure, struggling to keep up with growing demand, leading to water rationing or just system failures.
Okay.
And this intermittency, it's not all the same. The paper points out three types. There's predictable intermittency, like a public tap that's only open certain hours.
Right.
Then there's irregular, maybe the vendor who runs the water kiosk just stepped away but should be back soon.
Okay. Frustrating, but manageable, maybe.
And then there's unreliable. The source is just gone. The pump is broken. The vendor left, and you have no idea when or if it'll be back online.
That unpredictability must be incredibly stressful.
Hugely. And it has direct health consequences. Intermittent supply pushes people towards potentially less safe or less reliable alternative sources.
And you mentioned storage earlier.
Yes, it massively increases the need for household water storage. People have to collect water when they can and store it, often in containers that aren't perfectly clean or sealed. And that storage is a major point where contamination can get into the water.
So the water could be clean from the source, but get contaminated in the jerry can at home.
Easily. Plus, intermittent supply reduces the water available for basic hygiene, like hand washing. And there's another risk, too, with piped systems.
What's that?
When the water supply is off and the pipes lose pressure, they can actually suck in contaminants from the surrounding ground if there are leaks. Dirty water, groundwater, sewage.
Oh, wow. So the system itself can become contaminated because it's intermittent.
Exactly, leading to higher E. coli levels when the water comes back on and directly contributing to things like acute diarrhea.
That's a really vicious cycle. Okay, what about affordability? You hear this paradox sometimes.
Yes, it's a cruel irony. Households that aren't connected to the formal piped network, often the poorest, frequently end up paying more per liter of water from vendors or kiosks than richer households pay for treated tap water.
More for less reliable, potentially less safe water.
Precisely. And if you live in a slum that isn't legally recognized by the city, the prices can be significantly higher still. Lack of regulation, maybe exploitation.
And does this price fluctuate too?
Oh, absolutely. Prices can change with overall water availability. Think rainy season versus dry season impacting shallow wells or rainwater harvesting. They also change based on shifts in a household's own income. People might have work one week, not the next.
So that unpredictability means families might just not be able to afford enough safe water, even if it's physically available nearby.
Right. They might choose cheaper, unsafe sources, or simply reduce their overall water consumption below what's healthy. There was a big study, Drawers of Water 2, that tracked this over decades in East Africa. It found huge variations in the cost of unpiped water over time, sometimes getting cheaper, sometimes much more expensive.
Decades. So this isn't a new problem, just one we're maybe understanding better now.
Exactly. The temporal aspect has always been there. Okay, let's talk quality.
Right. So obviously the actual or even just the perceived quality of the water drives decisions about where to collect it. But as we've said, even those improved sources aren't always safe.
Correct. Contamination can happen anywhere along the chain. At the source itself, a well getting polluted. In the distribution system, leaky pipes, dirty kiosks. During transport, unclean containers, and as we highlighted, very often in household storage.
And the problem with measuring this is,
Most studies that look at water quality are what we call cross-sectional. They're like taking a single photograph, a snapshot in time.
so they measure the quality on one day.
Exactly, which completely misses the crucial changes over time. The paper uses this idea, think of it like a graph. You might see a long-term trend where overall water quality in an area is slowly improving over years.
Okay, that sounds good.
But that long-term average improvement could totally mask really sharp short-term spikes in contamination, like after a heavy rainfall washes waste into a water source.
And those short-term spikes are what actually make people sick today.
Precisely. That's what causes outbreaks of diarrhea or other waterborne diseases. Water that was safe yesterday might be dangerous today. This is why just relying on long-term averages or infrequent sampling is so problematic.
We need to capture those fluctuations.
We do, and people living there often respond to these changes based on what they can see or smell or taste, switching sources based on those sensory clues, which might or might not correlate with actual microbial safety.
And you mentioned climate change earlier. How does that fit in?
Well, climate change is predicted to increase the intensity of rainfall in many areas. More intense rain means more runoff, which can wash more pollutants from agriculture, from sanitation systems, from industry into water sources, impacting quality across different timescales.
It just adds another layer of dynamic change and risk.
It really is.
So we've talked about the water itself, availability, reliability, cost, quality, all changing over time.
Yeah.
How does the human, the social element, fit into this moving picture?
That's absolutely critical. The paper emphasizes how socio-cultural factors deeply influence everything we've discussed.
Like what kind of factors?
Things like caste or social hierarchy, ethnic or racial or religious identity, gender roles, and just general power dynamics within a community. These all heavily shape who can access which water sources, when, and how easily.
Are these factors static, or do they change too?
That's the key point. While some aspects of identity might be fixed, the way these factors play out in relation to water access can be very dynamic.
How so? Give us an example.
Okay, so water collection points a shared tap stand. They often become important social spaces, places where people interact, share information, but also where tensions can arise.
Like arguments over queue jumping.
Exactly. Long queues, especially when water is scarce, can lead to frustration, arguments, even conflict. And that experience might influence which sources people decide to use or avoid in the future, maybe choosing a slightly further source to avoid confrontation.
So the social dynamics directly impact water choices day to day.
Absolutely. And remember that study you mentioned earlier in an Indian slum? It found people sometimes stayed up literally all night just to be there when the water started flowing from the pipe to ensure they got their share.
Staying up all night.
Ah,
Just for water. It really puts the concept of availability into perspective, doesn't it? It's not just about distance, it's about time, sleep, safety.
everything. And despite knowing these social factors are hugely important, the paper notes there's actually limited hard evidence, limited empirical data on exactly how these dynamic social factors interact with the temporal changes in water access to specifically affect health risks.
So another area where we need more research.
Definitely. More systematic studies are needed there.
Okay, so given all these complexities, the changing water, the changing social dynamics, what's the path forward? What does the paper recommend?
Well, based on this whole analysis, it makes two really key recommendations for future research and ultimately for better interventions.
What's the first one?
First, it stresses the urgent need for more short-term monitoring of both water access and quality. We desperately need solid empirical evidence on these daily and weekly changes. How much does safe water access really fluctuate day to day?
How do we even collect that kind of data? It sounds intensive.
It is, but the paper suggests some interesting approaches, like possibly using citizen scientists.
Recruiting local residents.
Yeah, training and equipping members of the community to help collect frequent water samples or report on source availability using mobile tech, perhaps, getting that high-resolution data that traditional surveys miss.
Okay, that makes sense. Get the community involved. What's the second recommendation?
The second is to really dig deeper into those socio-cultural factors. We need more systematic studies to understand precisely how things like social conflict at water points, or changing gender roles, or community power structures interact with water access over time and how that affects health vulnerabilities.
So map out those social dynamics alongside the water dynamic.
Exactly, because knowing about these temporal struggles, both the physical water ones and the social ones, is what will give us much stronger evidence. And that stronger evidence should lead to better, more targeted strategies to actually improve water access and health outcomes.
Right. So wrapping this up, the really big takeaway from our deep dive today seems to be this. The difference a day can make, or even an hour in water access and quality in these urban slums, is just profound.
It's immense. And current ways of monitoring, mostly relying on those static snapshots, they are fundamentally missing this vital, fluctuating reality.
And understanding these temporal dynamics isn't just academic.
Not at all. It's absolutely crucial if we want to design health interventions and water policies that actually work in these complex environments. It means moving beyond those simple averages and snapshots to capture the full, complex flow of daily life.
And understanding how that flow determines who gets safe water and ultimately who stays healthy,
Precisely.
it really makes you think, doesn't it? How something we consider so basic, so universal, like water access, can actually be so dramatically different, almost invisibly so, from one hour to the next, just depending on where you happen to live in the world. What does that imply for how we understand other global challenges? How many other things that we measure with these sort of fixed, static metrics might actually be masking a rapidly changing dynamic reality underneath?